Game that everybody in the Big Ten has been waiting for here for a long time. It's a top 10 matchup between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the Penn State Nittany Lions. First time they've played a top 10 matchup against each other in 4 years. Here to break it all down, Mark Wogenrich from AllPennState. We'll dive into it next on the Buckeye Breakdown Podcast.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the heart of the Big Ten. This is where everybody wants to buy a ticket, wants to pay attention, wants to watch a huge game Saturday, kind of oddly, in my opinion, at 12 noon as Fox Big Noon kickoff, College Game Day, and everybody that's anybody around the country is going to be paying attention to the Buckeyes and the Nittany Lions. If this is your first time on the show, I'm Brendan Gulick. Glad to have you. And we've got a great guest with us here this morning, Mark Wogenrich from AllPennState, part of the Sports Illustrated Media Group, covers the Nittany Lions here on the FanNation network. We're going to have a little back and forth here where I'll ask Mark 5 questions. He'll ask me 5 questions. We're going to talk a little bit about our teams leading up to this game, and hopefully it'll be good content for you when you're watching from home. So, Mark, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, appreciate it, Brendan. Thanks. You mentioned the noon start. I'm kind of racking my brain of trying to remember when the last time I was at Ohio Stadium for a Penn State Ohio State noon start.
Yeah, kind of weird.
So just any tips about what arrival time? 8 a.m., 7 a.m. I mean,
the night before.
Yeah, exactly.
In all seriousness, the athletic staff at Ohio State has told fans, hey, don't wait. Try to arrive early. Yeah. They're actually opening the gates of the stadium half an hour earlier than normal. So gates will be open at 10 o'clock. For Ohio State fans that are listening, it's a Scarlet the Shoe kind of day. So wear your Scarlet gear. But in all seriousness, yeah, I would not try to show up just in the nick of time. It'll be crazy, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't I start with 5 questions, and then we'll play a little role reversal. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. First and foremost, how much do you personally, not necessarily the fan base, how much do you personally believe that this is James Franklin's best team and best shot to beat Ohio State?
It's up there. I would say it's up there with the 2017 team. This is his best defense, and this is going to be, when the season is done, this might be the best defense we've seen from Penn State. Historically, going back to some of the days of, like the 40s and 50s and 60s, kind of all-time sort of defenses. What they're able to do, the number of players they're able to play, the effect, the way they're able to affect opponents with the pass rush and concert with coverage, and just how they're able to keep teams from really getting on any roll through, turnovers, third down sacks, tackles, all that sort of thing. What they've done so far, what this defense has done to teams so far, is really kind of all-time level, but that's also got to take into account the the competition that they played. They have not played a really dynamic offense. It's funny, and James Franklin pointed this out last week, notably that UMass, the team they played last week and beat 63-0, statistically had the most explosive offense of any team that had played the season so far. And that is going to change. They're going up 8 levels here playing on Ohio State offense. It's just over the years has just torched them in so many different ways, downfield, big runs, tight ends, quarterbacks being able to run, even though that's different concern this year. This is that litmus test for the defense. But I think, as I said, I think this is his best defense. I also think this is the best team they've had since 2017 overall, from a depth perspective, a talent perspective. And they've got the quarterback who I think he's at the point of waiting for that breakout game. I think you are looking for it. He's not done anything wrong necessarily. Only quarterback in the country with at his number of pass attempts without an interception, but he hasn't beaten a team yet. He hasn't had to either. So that's the main thing as well. So James Franklin's 0-4 at Ohio Stadium, and there have been some tormentors there. And I mean, I did some numbers the other day. I think since 2014, they've been in a fourth quarter game with Ohio State 5 times, and they're 1-4 against them, losing only the 2016 game. And some of them have just been absolute torture. Last year, 2018, 2017, the whole, they run the gamut. So I think this is the year. I think this is the year he wants to kind of get that cleansing out of the way and take this particular team, into Columbus and finally win there.
Well, I mean, it certainly, when I have paid attention to them, it certainly looks like, hey, this team is legit. They don't seem to have a glaring weakness. But I want to ask you about the defense because you started to allude to it. I mean, that's the number one thing that Ohio State fans are pointing to, here going into the week. That's, hey, Penn State's a paper tiger. They've put up these great numbers defensively against nobody. They haven't been tested. They're not going to be able to cover Marvin Harrison, so on and so forth. How do you go about evaluating what you've seen while keeping in mind the level of competition where you still feel like, no, this really is one of the best defenses maybe in Penn State's history?
It's the level of consistency that they've played with. Initially, there were a couple of singular drives in certain games, especially at the beginning against West Virginia. And there was literally one play against Delaware that went 65 yards for a touchdown. They've had minimal breakdowns in that sense, but they've kept this level tone through the past 6 games. And I think the element that matters most for me is their pass rush. They've been using these 3 defensive end sets, and they have 3 NFL defensive ends, 2 of them next year and 1 in the future, in Adisa Isaac, Chop Robinson, and Denai Dennis Sutton, who just provide consistent, relentless pressure. Penn State leads the nation in pressures. I think it's something like 47% of dropbacks result in some sort of pressure. They lead the nation in sacks as well too. So that is part of how they're going to cover Marvin Harrison, in my opinion, as I think get the pressure on him. Their other strength is that back end, that secondary is phenomenal. I think the potential to see either Kalen King or Johnny Dixon, and I think they have two NFL cornerbacks in their starting rotation, in Kalen King and Johnny Dixon. To see either of them covering Marvin Harrison, that to me will be one of the kind of the subplot matchups to watch, or also how they decide to cover Marvin Harrison, whether they shade a safety on him, something like that. That will be I think that probably is the one issue. Their safeties have been very good, but they haven't necessarily been super tested in coverage in that way. So I'm going to see specifically Harrison, but also Cade Stover.
Sure.
I don't know. They have some linebackers who have some speed, who can maybe stay with them. But that is going to be, again, Cade Stover had a huge play against them last year at Beaver Stadium in that fourth quarter meltdown. And the pick your poison thing always comes into play with Ohio State. But I think this year, with the way they handle pass rush, that is going to be their primary element.
The pass rush, I guess, is the area that I want to focus on here because Ohio State's offensive tackles have been, I would say, average this year. They certainly haven't been what Ohio State's used to seeing. I think Ohio State fans are justifiably concerned with their ability to, really run the ball well. Penn State's defensive line in general has played well, but to your point, the edge rushers have been excellent. How much have you seen those guys be true game wreckers as opposed to, overpowering UMass, right? Where it's like you kind of expect that you're a big Power 5 team and you're gonna control the line of scrimmage against a lesser opponent.
Yeah, and we haven't seen that necessarily. I think probably the best comp, at least size-wise, would have been Iowa, but they didn't have any really the dynamism that Ohio State can bring in order to attack those elements of Penn State's pass rush. The game record concept, I think Chop Robinson absolutely is one, and Adisa Isaac has been one as well. But there's the relentlessness of it with 3 defensive ends, and they'll play them on the field at the same time. They've done that a couple times. I think it started with the Iowa game where they played all 3 of those defensive ends on passing, so essentially on passing downs, and you'll see Chop Robinson in the middle taking on guards, things like that. They will move guys. They're comfortable moving those players around, feeling like that they have the corners who can go into man coverage and protect the ball that way. They're comfortable with corner blitzes. They've done that a lot. They used a redshirt freshman cornerback last week, had a couple of sacks because they blitzed him. They're very comfortable with bringing different kinds of pressures as well, not just the defensive ends. They will use their linebacker, Abdul Carter, in pressure quite a bit. And Abdul Carter can be that kind of game-wrecking defensive player too, because he can move really, really well. He can get into the backfield, but he can also hang in coverage with players too. So they have a lot of versatility with him. I think that's probably the biggest thing I see is that, again, I've seen 3 defensive end looks from them. I've seen 4 linebacker looks from Penn State, and you'll see them sometimes in dime coverage. They have a prowler package, they call it, where they'll bring a safety in, and that safety can blitz and do a bunch of different things. The amazing thing, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the amazing thing, their leading tackler is around 20 tackles on this team. They rotate so many players in, and so many players contribute that I could sit here and say Chop Robinson is the guy that you want to watch in this game. And he might he might not get a sack. It might be somebody entirely different. And that, to me, is one of the bigger things with this defense, is just depth-wise and the talent of that depth being able to really kind of cover each other.
I love that. And it's fun to watch a team that's got that kind of depth for sure. All right, 2 more. Let's go to the offensive side of the ball, and let's talk Drew Aller for a second. Obviously came into Penn State with as much hype as you can. I mean, even just his performance at the Elite 11 camp when he was in high school. Northeast Ohio kid that I think was partly on Ohio State's radar. Ryan Day was asked about him several times yesterday. The reality is he committed to Penn State. Ohio State had Quinn Ewers. Quinn reclassified. Ohio State reached back out to Drew and recognized he was, committed to Penn State, and there really wasn't much of a conversation there beyond that. And so I would imagine that, there's probably this element of like, hey, I grew up there and I want to stick it to those guys the same way, Ben Roethlisberger thought he was going to be drafted by the Browns and ends up being the Browns slayer for 2 decades. You always carry that chip on your shoulder when maybe your hometown team, quote unquote, passed on you. And so Drew's got a ton of talent, and I personally don't know that we've seen the offensive play calls allow him to let it rip. I know maybe we've seen it a little bit early in the year, but I'm curious, as last year when I heard chants at the game for Drew to get in the game because the offense was sputtering, now that he is in a rhythm and, maybe it's not these big explosive plays the way people kind of hoped and expected. What is there right now from Penn State fanhood perspective to like about what they're seeing from Drew?
Well, I think, from the Jinx perspective, he hasn't thrown an interception yet this year, and that's 181 attempts this year. He's not thrown an interception in his career. He's at like 240 passing attempts dating back to last year without an interception. And I would love to go back and count the number of interceptions and pick sixes I've seen in this series.
Yep.
Mostly from one side. Last year being a fine example of that. Drew is a really unique. He's a unique talent and a unique story, because I think the theme going into this season with Drew and with the Penn State offense is, now that they had the big arm, the 6'4", 250-pound quarterback who can throw it all over the field, that they were going to be the legitimate big play team that they weren't necessarily under Sean Clifford. And they did hit some big plays under Sean, and they were a big play offense, obviously, with Trace McSorley going back to those days. But this was going to be the offense, is going to be the full picture. It's going to be the big play offense with Drew and with Nicholas Singleton running behind him. You weren't going to be able to contain all of this stuff. Receiver was a rightful question coming into the season, whether they could hold up, whether that crew could hold up its end of the bargain in the big play offense. And instead, what they are this year is a time of possession, ball control, do not turn it over offense. They lead the country in time of possession, and they rank last in plays of like 20-plus yards. Passing to end runs, they don't have. It's like their fourth string running back has the longest carry of the season, and that's because it's fourth quarter against a broken defense.
Sure.
The one thing James Franklin mentioned this at his Tuesday press conference is that you have a 5-star elite 11 quarterback. Well, how many of those quarterbacks in their day threw checkdowns in their backyard?
Right.
And in high school, even Drew played in a 5-wide. He played in, just a throw it all over the world offense. So what you've watched Drew become this year as a quarterback, I think that was one of the questions going into the season, is how could you harness that talent in a way that would become a complete picture quarterback? And that's what you're seeing unfold before your eyes. Yeah, he's really not taking the throws downfield. I think it's barely 10% of his throws have traveled 15 yards in the air this season. And he's averaging, I think it's around 6 air yards per attempt. It's last in the Big Ten among starters. But he scans the field really well. He finds check down receivers really well. He sees if there's somebody covered, and this is a big thing. I think this is a big thing in this game, that, one, if he sees the receiver's covered, he's not going to force a ball. But also, he's not seeing a lot of open receivers, or at least receivers with a lot of spread and daylight between them. And I think that's a big factor for Penn State. Can they separate against Ohio State secondary?
Yeah, and the reality I look at it and think it feels like death by 1,000 paper cuts at times, right? I mean,
and he's also terrific in the red zone. I mean, the one thing I go back to, I've mentioned this other places, against Iowa, I mean, they kind of plotted to move the ball a little bit, but he threw four red zone touchdown passes, and they were all on third or fourth down. 3 of them were to tight ends. He's been just phenomenal in the red zone. One of his better passes this year was a red zone throw that a running back dropped, and it was just this floated ball that was just perfectly placed, and the receiver or the running back just could not come up with it in a short yardage. That's the kind of thing. He'll make plays. He could throw the ball downfield, sure, but he will kind of drop your jaw with what looks like a simple throw anyway, a 2-yard red zone floater. And those are the kinds of plays that really that make you go, okay, yeah, he's a big play guy in waiting. But but then this year, then he hasn't had to be.
Yeah, well, look, in some instances when you have the ball in plus territory so many times and the field shrinks, it's also kind of hard to take 40-yard shots when your average starting field position feels like it's midfield sometimes. So not terribly surprised, but I think very highly of Drew. I think he's legit. I know he's young, but I think he's going to be really, really good. And I expect him to play well on Saturday. Last question I have for you is just around adversity. I think teams that are unbeaten don't often get talked enough about what they've had to go through to get to that point when you're, halfway through a season. Can you give Ohio State fans some kind of an idea of what sort of adversity Penn State's had to deal with this year?
None.
I mean, literally,
it's been very. Their adversity has been. You took a 10-3 deficit, or they were down 10-3 at Northwestern in the first half.
Yep.
Tied. I think it was a 10-0 lead. Well, it was a tie game with Northwestern, a 10-0 lead against Iowa. This has not been a team that's faced a lot of adversity. Their running backs, their two starting primary running backs, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, have very few fourth quarter carries. Part of the reason why I think they don't have a 20-yard gain between them is because they're not running in the fourth quarter.
Sure.
Their backup quarterback, Bo Pribula, has played in every single game. They rotate a ton of guys. They're able to play a lot of players because they have big fourth quarter leads. This has been a really good third quarter team. At some point, I think they hadn't allowed a third quarter point. They haven't been, but that's been their big thing. They've not been in a fourth quarter game at all this year. They've won everything by at least 14 points. Their adversity has been with game starts. Northwestern, Nicholas Singleton fumbled the opening kickoff, and Northwestern took over, I think, inside the 10 and got only a field goal out of it. So I can't say that there's been a game really at any point where you thought they're in trouble here. You know what I mean? It's really never been that way.
I guess even more from because I've followed it on a macro level, certainly understand that they've not played a particularly hard schedule. I'm thinking more like from injuries or position battles or are there position coaches that fans are not happy with that makes it sound like they're on the hot seat? Like anything that is testing this team beyond just, hey, we're playing a team that we're going to go beat by 30 points today.
Actually, what's testing this team right now is, I think, the fact that everything in this season is building toward 2 weekends. And that's their primary stress is Penn State is built towards this Saturday, but James Franklin is 1-8 against Ohio State. Sure. And 0-4 at Ohio Stadium. That is their stress because Penn State goes into this game thinking, we've built up all this cred now. Again, 6-0 and a top 10 team. We know people think we haven't really played anybody, but we've really taken good care of business so far. But if Penn State doesn't win this game, they're back to square one 5 years after losing to Ohio State which then led to the great to elite speech.
Sure.
And they'll do it again in 2 weeks against Michigan when Michigan comes to Beaver Stadium. That's the real stress of this year is getting over one of those two hurdles, really. Going 10-2 last year, winning the Rose Bowl, but losing to Ohio State and Michigan. Okay, there were some parts of the fan base that thought that's still a disappointing season. Even an 11-win year, including the Rose Bowl victory. But this is not that year. This is the year that began with Penn State playoff contender. In order to be a playoff contender, you must win one of these two games. So this is the stress, really, at this point.
The Buckeyes and Nittany Lions will play in State College in 2024, but this is not a protected rivalry anymore with the schedule changes in the Big Ten. And so in some ways, this feels like the end of an era, even though there will certainly be some good battles, we hope, along the way, as the Buckeyes and Penn State meet Saturday at 12 noon. All right, time for a role reversal. I'll sit on the hot seat here. What do you got?
I look forward to it. Good. Again, this is somebody macro level, Ohio State. I watched, Ohio State. I watched the Ohio State Maryland game, and was really impressed with a lot of that. And then there were questions too, which I'm sure that you've seen. Is this a great Ohio State team yet? I've seen great Ohio State teams. Is this one of them?
They are certainly trending that way. I don't know that I would, full bore, man, this team is great. I think this team is very, very good. I think this team has a lot of great players. They had a great moment for sure when they beat Notre Dame. And I think that helped a lot of people buy into what this group can be. I think Penn State's better than Notre Dame. I've felt that way all year long. And as an Ohio State fan, I would be more concerned about this week than I was going into Notre Dame. And Notre Dame was certainly capable of beating the Buckeyes, and they almost did. I personally believe in Kyle McCord quite a bit. I think there's a lot of noise out there about why he shouldn't be the guy and why this should have been Devin Brown's team. A lot of that has subsided a little bit. because Kyle's gone out and played well. I think Kyle processes the game really well. He sees the field well. He's thrown one pick all year, and it came in the first half of the first game against Indiana on a 4th down play where he took a little bit of a shot. It essentially worked out like a missed field goal. It was picked off, and they ran it back 15 yards. It was no big deal. So much like Drew in that regard, he's taking care of the football. The biggest concern where I would say this team might not be like, whoa, legit national championship lookout, great, everybody else is playing for second place, to me is because of the offensive line. Ohio State's offensive line has been fine. They are not nearly as good as they've been in years past, and that has definitely been a trouble spot. So they certainly have elite talent, right, at wide receiver, between Marvin and Emeka Egbuka and Julian Fleming, and what we've already seen flashes of with Brandon Inniss and Carnell Tate. Cade Stover is still the heart and soul of this team, his personality, his toughness, a tight end. He's still, I think, a great tight end. They've got a really, really deep running back room, and it's a good thing because they haven't been healthy. And we'll, I'm sure we'll discuss some of that here. I think it might be the deepest and best running back room in the country collectively. So, all the focal point came down to, can the quarterback develop enough, and can the offensive line keep him upright? And I would argue Kyle McCord has developed just fine and continues to get better. The offensive line is getting better, but maybe not quite at the same pace that Kyle is. And if Ohio State wants to win a national championship, certainly if they want to win this weekend and if they want to beat Michigan, that offensive line is going to be under a microscope for sure.
That leads into my next question. The quarterbacks, the quarterbacks who have beaten the Ohio State quarterbacks who have beaten Penn State are far different than Kyle McCord. Obviously, C.J. Stroud. You can go back to J.T. Barrett with that game. How is this offense different under McCord than it has been in previous seasons? And is that something that Penn State can use to its advantage?
I actually don't think
strength. Which is pass rush strength.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think it's terribly different than what we've seen in the past. There's a different quarterback, and you got 3 new offensive linemen. Again, the offensive line hasn't been great, and so there have been a lot of instances where Kyle's thrown off his back foot. Last week against Purdue's not very good, but a lot of times they brought 6 with 5 blockers, and so as a quarterback, you kind of have to buy a little time and drift whatever direction that extra hat is coming from, drift away from him. And to Kyle's credit, when he made some throws that were a little off balance or a little off his back foot, wasn't really, driving the ball, largely was still reasonably good, especially consider it was raining last week. I am concerned. If I'm an Ohio State fan, I'm concerned about the line of scrimmage this week. Flat out. I think really highly of Penn State's defensive line, and I've seen enough play from Ohio State's offensive tackles that lead me to believe that the Buckeyes need to be schematically on point and try to use Penn State's aggressiveness defensively against them. But I'm sure James Franklin and his staff are cognizant of that, right? There's to me, in my mind, there's almost an element of trying to coach the defense for Penn State this week, the same way Jim Knowles has adjusted with Ohio State's defense. And by the way, I totally left out the elite level defense in the first answer there. But, there is an element, in my opinion, of if Penn State doesn't need to send extra bodies to create pressure, they're going to make it that much more difficult because they might be able to generate enough of a pass rush with just their defensive line coming. So, what does this offense look like this year and how is it different from last year? I don't think it's terribly different. We've seen a couple little things here and there. Week 1, they came out and put 3 tight ends and 2 running backs and ran some power football. Everybody's like, what is this? Haven't really seen much of that since then. We've seen a lot of depth played, maybe not as last week. We didn't see as many stretch handoffs to the boundary, which seems to be like Ohio State's staple run play forever. But largely I think a lot of what Ohio State does looks similar, and it's got a lot to do with the fact that, the majority of their skill position guys came back this year.
Now, you mentioned Ohio State's defense, and they're just, Penn State and Ohio State are like, 1A, 1B in a bunch of Big Ten and national rankings, flipping back and forth between them. They've probably, they've been as just as disruptive and as suffocating as Penn State's been against the schedule, and against a better schedule, frankly, so far, at least against two better offenses than Penn State has played. How does Ohio State's defense approach a game where the offensive identity is in my opinion, for Penn State, different than maybe what you expected? And they have 6 games of film to watch and have seen that this is not the big play offense that maybe the people came into the year expecting, but it's comfortable in its skin of time of possession, extending drives, and being a red zone team. Can Ohio State play defense against that?
Yeah, I think Ohio State, without a sliver of a doubt, in every category that matters, is a top 5 defense in the country. And certainly in a lot of ways, Penn State looks like that same caliber of defense. There have been a few rumblings of displeasure from the defensive line because we haven't seen the high sack totals or high tackle for loss totals. I think it's been a byproduct of the fact that the Buckeyes have seen a lot of teams that are trying to get the ball out of their hands quickly. Indiana did not want to drop back and throw the ball very much. Youngstown State had no interest in doing that. Western Kentucky has one of the most pass-happy offenses in America. Their quarterback last year led FBS in passing, and the kid wants to just chuck it all over the field. And the ball was out of his hand in 2 seconds almost every time. So, when Ohio State fans are like, why is Jack Sawyer not racking up sacks the way we expect him to? He's supposed to be this big prospect. It's kind of like, pump the brakes a little here. It's not a huge deal. It starts up front, and Penn State knows it better than anybody else, unfortunately, because of what JT Tuimoloau did last year. He is different, and he is capable of doing what he did in that game last year pretty regularly. He made a couple of enormous plays in the Notre Dame game that helped Ohio State get the ball back and conserve some time. And ultimately drive down the field and win that game. Tyleik Williams at defensive tackle, it's been a monster. He's been completely relentless. And I came into the season expecting that I would say that a little bit more about Mike Hall, who's also been very, very good. But I'm pleasantly surprised with how well Tyleik Williams has played. And Jack Sawyer's been excellent. Caden Curry has been excellent. We've seen a little Kenyatta Jackson. He's played really, really well. So it starts up front for the Ohio State defense. Tommy Eichenberg maybe hasn't had his best 2 games the last 2 weeks, but has largely been rock solid and, essentially quarterbacks the defense. Cody Simon has earned his way on the field a little bit more recently instead of Steel Chambers. Cody's been really good, especially in the run game. Jim Knowles likes to use Steel a little bit more in the pass game. The big improvement coming into the year overall is the secondary, and anybody that watched Ohio State the last 2 years, they basically came into this season saying exactly one thing: I'll start believing in this team when they stop giving up big plays, because Michigan and Georgia destroyed the Buckeyes. They had combined 8 plays of 40 yards or more. Ohio State has not given up a single play of 40 yards or more in 6 games this year. And it has a lot.
Penn State has one offensively. Penn State has one. So.
And to that point, I don't know that they're not capable of it. They just haven't done it. And so I actually asked Ryan Day yesterday kind of about that. It's like, how do you prepare for what you haven't seen on film? Like, you know what their talent is. You guys cross recruit a lot of the same stuff. You know what they're capable of. Like, how do you try to make sure you're ready for everything, even though you might only be seeing a small part of it? And, I guess I didn't expect him to go into great detail, but he basically just said, it's your job. You got to figure it out. And Jim Knowles went on to say, like, be ready for everything, stop everything. The defense has to do its job. And to Jim's credit, he's acknowledged several times publicly this year that he's essentially changed his philosophy defensively from where he was at Oklahoma State, because his two defenses the last 2 years at Oklahoma State that were top 5 in the country were ultra aggressive, like extremely aggressive. And when he came to Ohio State, he had a similar mentality, and there were huge steps forward because schematically it was better than where it was 2 years ago anyways. But the Buckeyes still couldn't stop giving up big plays. And he said, I had to essentially tell myself in the offseason, you know what? I got a little bit better athlete here. I got a little bit deeper roster here. I don't necessarily need to call crazy exotic blitzes. I got to trust the guys up front that are good enough to get home. I got to trust them to do it and play a defense that's, not, I don't want to use the word softer, but less likely to get beat over the top. And through 6 games, they haven't. So it's still an aggressive secondary. Josh Proctor is like the most aggressive safety you're ever going to see play, and it's going to burn him somewhere along the way. I'm sure of it. Sonny Styles is a young kid with a super bright future. Lathan Ransom's played well this year. Denzel Burke at corner has had a far better year this year than he did last year. Looks like the freshman All-American he was 2 years ago. And I think Davison Igbinosun has played fine. I'm not like completely enthralled with what I've seen from him, but step up for sure. Jermaine Matthews may get some time at cornerback this weekend too because of some injuries. So yeah, Ohio State, make no mistake about it. They are for real because their defense this year has totally changed the game for them.
You mentioned some of the injuries. This is, I at least initially, it looks like Ohio State's injuries are far more, a far bigger issue than Penn State's. Penn State really has only one starter who they don't expect to have, at least as of today, in their left guard, JB Nelson. And he would be that they would be down to basically like the third left guard. But otherwise, they've been fairly healthy. They come into this game fairly healthy unless something changes in that respect. And it seems like Ohio State, especially in offense, and it's, as you mentioned, in the backfield, is not. How much of an injury issue do they really have going into this game?
There's a part of me that wants to say, I guess we'll wait and see, because Ryan Day doesn't ever talk about injuries. But certainly coming out of Penn State last weekend wasn't comfortable. Emeka Egbuka did not make the trip, and Mayan Williams did not make the trip. Travion Henderson made the trip, was a game-time decision, warmed up, and then never put pads on. And Chip Trainum, who, for Penn State fans that aren't familiar with him, he's an Akron kid, went to Archbishop Hoban, which is clearly one of the best high school football teams in the country the last few years. He was a complete wrecking ball for them as a running back and a linebacker. Wanted to be a running back in college. Ohio State recruited him hard and said, "We like you at linebacker." And they developed a good relationship, but he said, "I really want to be a running back." So he went to Arizona State, and ultimately decided he didn't like it there. And he transferred back to Ohio State as a linebacker. And then the Buckeyes got into a situation last year where they needed some help in the running back room. When Travion got hurt, Chip went over there, and he's never gone back to linebacker, and he's looked really good. He got annihilated in a hit last weekend. I have to think it was a concussion. It was a little scary watching him come off the field because he was slowly jogging off and, called for a sub, and he basically had to jog the entire width of the field. And he basically got between the hash marks and he fell over and needed some athletic training staff to come out and get him. So I hope he is progressing. When Ryan Day was asked about it yesterday, he was pretty straightforward and said, "I'm optimistic and hopeful that these guys are going to all play this weekend." I'm not sure I really expected him to say anything else. The Buckeyes unfortunately are dealing with, some bumps and bruises. Again, they're not dealing with what appears to be any season-ending injuries to any of these guys, so that's promising. Dallin Hayden got a great opportunity last weekend and played well. Ohio State's kind of got an embarrassment of riches at a couple of these position groups. I mean, Dallin Hayden would start at just about any place in the country. And they were talking about redshirting him this year because they wanted to try to preserve a year of eligibility for him with 3 guys in front of him. And as Ryan Day said, they were going to try to do that unless a bomb went off scenario, and it did, right? All of a sudden you're down your 3 starters. So Dallin went in and he looked really good last week. Might not have been terrific in pass protection, but all in all, it's a rock solid effort. So, the Buckeyes aren't going to make any excuses. It's next man up, but they are definitely – they look a little different without Emeka, Travion, Chip, and Mayan all on the field. So I hope that those guys are available. Thankfully, defensively, at this point, that we know of, not missing anybody of any real consequence.
Lastly, I think there's a narrative going around this game, or at least a question of which coach needs the win more. I find that interesting because James Franklin, again, has not beaten Ryan Day yet, and he's not won at Ohio Stadium. And Ryan Day is 51-6? That's his career record. And
51-6, he's 34.
Midnight field goal away from being in the national championship game. To me, it's obvious that if you're just talking about this particular game, and again, this game, even if Penn State loses, they still have Michigan in 2 weeks. So they're at home. So there's that opportunity is still there. But if you want to talk about ask the question, who needs this win more, James Franklin or Ryan Day? To me, it's obvious that it's James Franklin. From the Ohio State perspective, why is the answer Ryan Day?
You answered the question by asking it because it's from the Ohio State perspective. I have a hard time disagreeing with you. I think some of the hyperbole around Ryan Day's on the hot seat or, can't win the big game or whatever, the guy's 51-6 and he hasn't lost to anybody that you're like, how did you lose to them?
He doesn't have a 9 overtime Illinois game.
No.
Yeah.
And by the way, he's churned out a Heisman finalist several years in a row here. I think the standard at Ohio State it's different because they make it different. It's not because other schools don't try to do the same thing that they do. A lot of what Ohio State a lot of what is put on Ohio State externally has a lot to do with the fact that they put it on themselves. Ryan Day says it all the time. We're not allowed to lose around here. You can't lose, period. And, when you make it public and very clear that you have 3 goals every year, beat the team up north, go to and win the Big Ten championship game and win the national championship. When you talk about those expectations publicly all the time, that becomes what you're measured by. And so when you fall a little short of that, even if you have an incredible win in the Rose Bowl in a non-college football playoff game, right? But an instant classic, one of the all-time great Rose Bowls with the best individual bowl performance for a receiver in the history of every bowl game, right? What Jackson Smith and Jigba did that day. When you lose to Michigan at home a year after they kicked your butt up in Ann Arbor, and Ryan Day would say we played tough. He didn't question his team's toughness, but they got beat up a little bit last year at the line of scrimmage again. They couldn't stop the run. They played unbelievable football against Georgia, and you could make an argument that the taking the targeting call away when Marvin Harrison was literally knocked unconscious in the end zone, taking that away from Georgia may have helped Georgia climb back into the game. And ultimately the Buckeyes still had a chance to hit a field goal as time expired to go to the national championship. And I don't think there's a fan in the world that expected TCU would beat Ohio State if they would have played each other in a national title game. So, to get back to your question, I agree with you, right? I'm trying to look at this objectively. James Franklin probably needs this game more than Ryan Day does. How many times can you be in the same division and not get over the hump of a team you've been chasing forever? But I would argue that because what Ohio State is trying to accomplish, and they have so many of the same players from where they were that close last year, this team is going to look really different next year. Not bad, but different. And they're going to have a lot of inexperience at some critical spots. I think the pressure is on Ohio State to get it done this year. And to their credit, I think they've done a pretty good job of staying in the moment of like, look, we don't have to be good enough to beat Penn State this week. We're just playing Western Kentucky. Like, let's just get better. Let's go beat the Hilltoppers. Okay. Let's just go play Maryland. And then we'll see what we can do about being at our best this week. And then we'll figure it out for next week. And I think this team looks a lot better than it did in week 1 against Indiana. I'll say that for sure. There's always pressure on the coach at Ohio State to win. And I don't agree at all with Coach Harbaugh when he said Ryan Day was born on third base. But I mean, Ryan Day certainly inherited a juggernaut, and he has proven plenty capable of continuing to perform at a really high level, especially as the landscape around college football has changed. I think Ohio State wishes they had some NIL stuff in place a little bit sooner to maybe go get a couple of offensive linemen that they really, really wanted. I'm not trying to like dunk on Josh Simmons. He played at San Diego State last year, and he was good, but I watch him play, and I don't feel like he is elite. Donovan Jackson, left guard this year, supposed to be an All-American, not playing like it. Josh Fryer at right tackle, not playing great. And Ohio State doesn't have a lot of depth on the line right now. So there are some areas where the Buckeyes can continue to get better. But Ryan Day has, I think he's embraced this role of, I need to light a fire under this team. And a loss to Penn State would be really tough to swallow. Certainly wouldn't wreck their season, because I think everybody right now is going, well, what if Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State all go 1-1 against each other and win every other game? Then what happens? It's like, well, let's get to that point first, right? Let's see what happens. So objectively, I agree with you. James Franklin needs it more, but you're going to have a hard time convincing somebody from Ohio State that James Franklin needs it more than Ryan Day does.
That's fascinating to me. It really is.
Yep. It's a weird world we live in. That's for sure. Mark, this has been great, man. I appreciate your time and your insight.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Looking forward to a fun day on Saturday. And for all those that are watching, tell them where they can find all the work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, we're at AllPennState on the SI.com platform, like you, the FanNation.com platform, SI.com/college/Penn State. And hopefully you can watch this as well, too. Definitely going to share this on our site, because I think, there's just a lot of Penn State fans out there who come into this game with their, cautious optimism this year. But man, Ohio State is their Lucy. I'll tell you what, that football has got to, it's always there and it's always pulled away. And so I think there's just some rightful caution, the best word I could come up with about this. They want to believe, they also want to see it.
So I think there's a lot of folks on both sides that are nervous about this weekend, and by 10 a.m. on Saturday, they'll be talking themselves into, we're not nervous at all. It's gonna be just fine. That's why we love this game. Mark, thanks very much. We'll see you at the shoe.
Thanks. Good. Thanks, Brennan.
All right. For all the latest news and info on the Buckeyes, head over to BuckeyesNow.com, and certainly would appreciate it if you'd subscribe to this YouTube channel as well, so we can continue to have content for you just like this. For Mark Wogenrich, I'm Brendan Gulick. Buckeyes and Nittany Lions, top 10 matchup at the shoe Saturday at noon. See you there.